So today I'm going to be talking about what I call the humane myth. And it's going to be done through the unique lens of a sanctuary. I feel very strongly that farmed animal sanctuaries are uniquely positioned to offer insight into this particular subject. We rescue animals from small farms and we rescue animals from industrial farms. So we can relate those stories to you in the context of, can we humanely, kindly, justly raise animals for either their dairy, their eggs, or for slaughter? Next. I'm going to start with eggs for a variety of reasons. I have literally scooped up hens from pasture-based farms and brought them to our sanctuary. I have been on industrial battery cage farms and pulled hens whose feathers had been ripped off from battery cages. And they have all recovered at Animal Place and gone on to either stay there or live out their lives. Our Rescue Ranch program has saved thousands of lives, and the vast majority of them are hens from the egg industry. We have a lot of experience with these chickens, and that is why I want to start with the egg industry. Next. So I'm going to do that through a little bit of storytelling. I want you to meet 4 of the hens who have come through Animal Place's barn doors. We've got Frida and Peanut, the 2 brown hens. They're both from a pasture-based farm. If you visited this farm, it looks very similar to a sanctuary. It's got bucolic green grass. It's absolutely gorgeous, and that is the type of farm they're from. Luna, who is always having a fabulous feather day, is from a rescue we did in 2012. We call it Turlock. We saved more than 4,000 hens from an egg farm that had been starving those birds for more than 2 weeks, and she is a permanent resident. Poppy is from our most recent rescue we did in late July. We took in 3,000 hens from a battery cage operation, and she is actually available for adoption at our Grass Valley Sanctuary. Next. So I want to start off with where all of these hens came from. And it's really interesting because we have been able to ask farmers specifically about pulling these hens before the farmers send them to slaughter. We get a much more detailed background on these birds than we normally would. So we actually know where all 4 hens originated from. So all 4 hens actually were hatched in a large hatchery called Highline Hatchery. And I talk about Highline Hatchery because it is the world's largest hatchery. If you buy white eggs, 85% of all white eggs in the United States come from hens who were hatched at a Highline Hatchery. 50% of the entire world's production of eggs comes from hens who were hatched at Highline Hatchery. They don't just supply industrial farms. Frida and Peanut both ended up at pretty small pasture-based farms, and they still were hatched out at Highline Hatchery. Next. So what is the hatchery? The hatchery, of course, is not a nice, happy place where hens go lay their eggs and nests and chicks pop out all cute and adorable. These are artificial incubators. They're large warehouses with up to 300,000 eggs in these types of incubators. When the chicks are born, they're all separated by sex. At Highline Hatchery, they produce both brown and white chickens. Brown chickens lay brown eggs, white chickens lay white eggs. They separate these birds by feather color. The birds on the top are male, the birds on the bottom are female. Next. If they're white birds, they separate them by feather length. Male chicks, their feathers grow slower. Female chicks, their feathers grow faster. Next. So rooster chicks, these guys are tiny, skinny birds. These breeds are bred for egg production. So rooster chicks don't produce eggs, and they do not grow as fast as the types of chickens who are raised for their flesh. It's just not economically viable for an egg farm or a hatchery to keep these birds alive. The top photo shows what Highline Hatchery does to virtually all of the male chicks that end up born at their hatcheries. It's called a macerator. This is an AVMA approved method of culling unwanted rooster chicks. It's an industrial grinder that the live male chicks are thrown into and they're ground up alive. On some of the smaller hatcheries that supply urban backyard chicken ranchers or just people who want backyard pet chickens, they often gas the birds, the roosters, to death. A few still just throw the rooster chicks into garbage bins and suffocate them. It doesn't matter where you buy your eggs from. If you buy them from the farmer's market, if you buy pasture-based, cage-free, or just your traditional, whatever you see in the grocery store, every hen chick who is born, there is a rooster chick. His life is of no value to the egg industry, and he is killed the day that he is sexed, which is basically 1 or 2 days of age. Next. The females, this is a highline hatchery, and this is a debeaking machine. The chicks are shoved into these machines. They're restrained by their head, and an infrared laser then cuts off a portion of their beak. Frida and Peanut, who both ended up really nice pasture-based farms, were both debeaked. The egg industry calls it beak trimming, a nice euphemistic term to make it sound a little less awful than it actually is. And then of course Poppy and Luna were also debeaked more severely, but even when you buy free-range eggs, if you buy cage-free eggs or caged eggs, all of those hens have been debeaked. There are certainly some small farms that do not debeak. You can find them, so I don't want to stand here and say that every single egg-laying hen is debeaked, but the vast majority are, and many of them end up on quote-unquote humane, nice pasture-based farms. Next. Take a drink of water. This is an issue a lot of people are totally ignorant of, both in the animal rights movement and just mainstream public. These are the breeder birds who are going to produce the hens who are going to end up on egg farms. Breeder birds are, you can hit next, sorry. Breeder birds are housed in these type of systems, of confinement systems. They're either housed in what are called enriched colony cages, where they have maybe 20 or 30 hens and 1 or 2 roosters in each cage. These are a smaller version of that cage. Or they're housed on cage-free operations. To get brown chickens, you cross a white hen with a brown rooster. That's why there's brown roosters in there. Parent birds are never given outside access, so they're either in these large warehouses or cages, and they're all slaughtered when they're 18 to 20 months old. By poultry regulations, they cannot sell these birds for slaughter, so they're all killed and then usually composted or dumped at the landfill. Next. This is a photo from one of the big 5 hatcheries. It's called Meyer Hatchery, that supplies small urban farmers and people who want to buy chicks for backyard little companion chickens. The same rules apply. The chickens are housed indoors. Obviously they have more room. It's a much smaller hatchery, but this is their life for 18 to 20 months before they are killed. Next. I want to talk a little bit about production levels. It may not seem like this has much applicability to this discussion, but it really does, because I want to show you that even if you buy eggs from really nice farms, what we have done to these birds in terms of their production level is pretty horrific. Next. This is Dorothy. Whenever I see our animals, I talk in that voice. So Dorothy is one of our Animal Place rescues. She is what the kind of ancestors of domestic chickens look like, wild jungle fowl. She's one of the only chickens who has been sneaky enough to go lay her own clutch of eggs and then proudly come back to the sanctuary with 7 little chicks in tow, much to our chagrin. So she produces 3 cartons of eggs a year. So the reason chickens lay eggs, why hens lay eggs, is for this. Little babies. It's for the next generation. That is the only reason egg production exists, is to produce the next generation. And when those chicks are in the egg, mama here, she starts talking to them day 1. They're not even out of the egg yet, but she's talking to them. As they get closer to hatching, they start talking back. It is an incredibly important social bond that is formed even before the chicks hatch out into the world, so that when they hatch, they know their mother's voice immediately. And all chickens, whether it be raised for meat production, egg production, turkeys who are raised for meat production, they never have that. That's an incredibly important social bond that they are deprived of from day 1. But this is what's normal for a chicken. Spring and summer, they lay a few clutches of eggs to produce babies. Next. This is Carol. Carol was rescued from another egg farm. She has not been debeaked. She's called an Australorp. They're considered dual-purpose breeds. They're raised for their flesh and for egg production. She was from one of the egg farms we have pulled birds from. 3, 6, 9, 11. She lays about 150 eggs a year. It's still an enormous amount of eggs. It's about 11 egg cartons worth, but it's less than what? Next. This is Julie and Chloe, and they're both from battery cage operations. And these are the most common types of chickens used for egg production, the white leghorn being the most prominent breed used. They lay all these eggs in 1 year. It's about 25 to 28 cartons worth of eggs a year. Coincidentally, this happens to be the average amount of eggs the average American consumer consumes in a year. It's a lot of eggs. So what happens to these birds when they lay so many eggs? They suffer a lot of osteoporosis. So instead of having that store of calcium that they normally use to lay a few clutches, they start sucking it from their bones because they don't have that store anymore. So they suffer bone breaks, fractures, and osteoporosis. They have enormously high rates of ovarian cancer because they are being flooded with all those hormones like estrogen that their cancer rates just skyrocket. They get their eggs stuck inside of them frequently. It's just often a common ailment of these types of chickens. And this is not because of hormone usage. It's illegal to use hormones in chickens. It's not because of antibiotic usage, although they do use growth promotants in the egg industry. It is because we had chickens who laid an abnormal amount of eggs, and we just kept breeding them and breeding them and breeding them until we have these really highly selected breeds who have just been chosen for egg production. So even if you buy from nice pasture-based farms, these hens are virtual prisoners in their own bodies, and that's nothing that rescue can save. We take these hens in and they do not live long lives. They live another maybe 1 to 3 years after we rescue them because of what humans have done to them in terms of artificial selection. Next. Next. I'm not going to talk too much about this. This is a standard battery cage farm. This farm houses about 3 million hens in Michigan. It's one of the largest in the country. But I want to talk a little bit more about some of the other caging or housing facilities. Next. It's really interesting because as I was putting this presentation together, and I had, honest to God, already selected all these photos, I had asked some people to donate empty egg cartons. These aren't my egg cartons because I don't eat eggs. And it just happened to coincide that some of the egg cartons they had donated were actually from these farms. You guys, I can pass it around if you want. This is called Glom's Organic Free Range Egg Farm. It's a farm in Santa Cruz County, and they have a lot of chickens. If you look at their egg carton, nice picture. It's really bucolic. It's the sun setting. It's really nice and lovely. It's a certified humane farm, and it's a USDA organic farm. This is what their farm looks like. So they have only cage-free operations. The hens do not have outdoor access. They have about 40,000 chickens. They have white hens and they have brown hens. They do have perches. They obviously have a better existence than a hen in a cage would, but they don't have outdoor access and they are debeaked. And you can see from the air, their farm doesn't look dramatically much different than a standard battery cage egg farm. Next. This is my favorite though. Organic Valley Co-op is the largest producer of organic eggs in the United States. They say inside their egg carton, our family farmers treat their hens to daily access to the outdoors and sunshine. If you go to their West Coast suppliers page, which is Judy's Family Ranch, this is the picture they show on their website. It's really pretty. Nice green grass. It looks like it might be a happy place to live. Next. This is what the indoor of their egg sheds look like. So the hens are housed in cage-free operations. Obviously they have some perching spaces, but this is their lives. They're debeaked and they live here for 2 years until they're sent to slaughter. And when you see an aerial view of their farm, it doesn't really look at all different than what a standard egg farm looks like. They also have a dairy operation, so that's what that part is. But these are all their egg-laying sheds. This Organic Valley Co-op made a specific exemption for the outdoor access just for this farm so that California consumers could buy USDA organic eggs and feel like really good about themselves, even though this is what that farm looks like. Next. These are a couple photos from some farms we've pulled, not the specific farms, but types of farms we've pulled from some of the smaller farms. These are considered pasture-based farms, so they have obviously more room to roam. This is, if anybody knows who Joel Salatin is, this is Polyface Farm, and they keep their hens inside these hoop barns 5 months out of the year when it's winter time, and they also keep little rabbits in tiny cages before they slaughter them. I want to just talk a little bit about why I have a problem with this operation. Next. The very first farm we worked with, it was a beautiful farm. grass, green graze. The hens had ample access to outside. They seemed to be enjoying their lives. The farm did not want us to come on site to pull these hens. They were going to be giving us about 200 hens before they were going to be sent to slaughter. And we thought that was a little curious, but this was our first rescue, so we really just wanted to accommodate them. And so we dropped our crates off, they loaded the birds up, and then we brought them to the sanctuary. And as we were pulling them out, it became very evident why they did not want us to be on their farm and see these birds. When these birds were very little, they were given plastic leg bands as identification. And then they were never taken off. So for 2 years, these leg bands, as that hen chick grew, became severely embedded into their legs. There were over 15 hens who had lost feet, and all of them had, this goes down to bone. That's how far that leg band has gone. And it goes to show that even on these nice small farms, this is a farm that has maybe 1,000 chickens, which is really small, all things considered, they cannot practice good individual animal management. They cannot provide individual veterinary care to their animals. And while we do that for all the chickens who are at our facilities. They're all individually checked and individually provided medical attention. That is not possible on a farm that is raising hens for commercial profit. Next. You can click one more time. There is no happy sanctuary for the 250 million hens who are sent to their death. At the end of the day, when it becomes not profitable anymore to feed those hens so that they keep making those eggs, these hens are all sent to their death. These hens are only 1 to 2 years of age. The oldest group of hens we've ever rescued have been 3 years of age. So they're in the prime of their lives. They're young animals. On small farms, they may send them to smaller poultry processing facilities. These are actually Buff Orpingtons, not egg-laying hens, but I just wanted to show what that method of slaughter looks like. This is an industrialized poultry processing plant where they're stunned with electrified water and then their throats are cut. In California, we're the 5th largest producer of eggs. We have about 20 million hens on egg farms in the state. But we do not sell those chickens for human or even pet food consumption. Some of them sell a small percentage of them. The vast majority are so small and so skinny that they don't have a lot of meat on them. So they are all gassed. And I have seen gassing. It is not a pretty sight. They are literally thrown into curb-sized garbage bins. And they're thrown in with about 60 hens in each garbage bin, and then carbon dioxide is funneled in. If you are a lucky hen, you've already hopefully died at the bottom. If you're not, you're still alive when they dump you out in there. They sweep out the barns on both small and large farms, and the shit is piled outside, and then the dead bodies are dumped into that shit. And the hens are not always dead. And when they're not always dead, then they are manually killed. It is not a pretty sight. And that is the fate of all egg-laying hens. They are all killed when they are still young adult animals. Next. So for me, these are kind of the key takeaways about why there can't be humane egg production. You can't get around the rooster chick issue. Even if you raise them to slaughter weight, you're still taking their lives. So all the rooster chicks, 150 million a year, are killed. You can't escape the issue of parent or breeder birds. They're all confined indoors. They have no access to outdoors. They're debeaked, and they're all killed when they're 18 to 20 months old. And you cannot get away from what we have done to select for high egg production and the horrible side effects, the health impact that has on those chickens. And then, of course, at the end of the day, all those animals are sent to slaughter. So after each section, I'm not done. If you wish. I will open it up for a few minutes of questions and then move on to the next section. If I'm not able to answer a question, we have a table inside, or I'll stand outside for a few minutes, and you're welcome to come up and talk to me then. But are there any questions now? Okay, lots of questions. Yeah.
Just a quick one about Judy's. Didn't they get a huge fine?
They were sued by ALDF. I don't know the status of that lawsuit for mislabeling, because they do label their eggs free range or pasture based. I don't know if they've received a fine, to be honest.
What is a real dilemma for me is that I have cats, and I feel like cats are carnivores. And so, like I'm feeding them this raw meat diet, which is primal, but then I don't know how to reconcile this thing of, I feel like cats are carnivores and they need to keep them healthy, but then, you know what I mean? I'm like also promoting this, and buying them the meat-based foods
Sure.
that I feel. So what are your info on that?
I think it's an ethical conundrum most vegans and vegetarians grapple with.
Okay.
My focus here is really on what we as individuals can do with our own food choices, and not necessarily what we can do for the companion animals. I don't have cats. I know they're obligate carnivores. I know people who've had them on vegan diets successfully, not so successfully. I feed my dogs a vegan diet because they're not obligate carnivores, but my focus really is on, as consumers, as ethical people, what can we do with it, what's within our own power to do.
Yeah.
And the best thing is what we can do with our own food choices. Yeah.
In a perfect world where all human beings are vegans, what is your vision of how we would keep these species alive?
These, the egg-laying
All the
chickens?
species of animals that we now slaughter, and they prosper because we breed them for eating. And now the whole world's vegan, and are we just going to let these species disappear?
If you want my honest answer, and maybe some people won't like it, yes. These birds have been, in the case of egg-laying chickens or even chickens bred for meat consumption, expecting them to survive in the wild is cruel. They're big white birds. They'll be seen by predators. They're wrought with health problems, so many health problems. And certainly in an ideal world, they would just eventually phase out, and the ones who were left alive lived at sanctuaries for the rest of their lives. But what we have done to these animals is unconscionable. It really is. And we have wreaked havoc on their bodies, their reproduction, their lifespan. So I would not be adverse, and I know it's awful for people to think about extinction in that way, but I wouldn't be adverse for the white leghorn to stop existing in its current form.
They're already kind of extinct.
Yeah, they can't survive without our intervention.
It's already.
I think that would be better because they're suffering so much right now. And we as human beings, we are really horrible human beings. I mean, the government just received information about how polluted the planet is. And 95% of the pollution is ours. We are the ones. We occupy 25% of the planet. That's how much we have, space for us we have. But we are contaminating 100% of this planet. I mean, we are really horrible. And
Yeah,
if
we're
we don't
pretty
wake up,
destructive.
no, this is the truth.
No, I absolutely
If we don't
agree.
wake up and do something about it, this planet that is our home is gonna, all of us are gonna end. The planet will continue with us because as soon as we die, the planet will flourish.
Yeah, I totally don't disagree. I just a little short on time, so we're going to be moving on. But any conversation we want to continue or questions after the presentation, I can answer that. Okay. Go ahead.
Just one, just real quick, how do they kill the chickens? When people, I mean, there's different. I've heard all kinds of different ways they're alive, or they boil and all sorts of stuff. What actually happens to these chickens?
You mean egg-laying chickens?
Egg-laying chicken, all of them. They all end up in the same
They're all
boat.
different.
They all end up, well, it depends on what state they're from, a lot of different factors. If they're going to a traditional slaughterhouse or an industrialized one, they're transported in crates and trucked miles to the slaughterhouse. They're pulled out and they're shackled upside down, and then they're usually dipped in what is called an electric water bath, which is supposed to stun them unconscious, but often just renders them immobile so they can still feel. And then their throats are cut either by an industrialized cutting blade or by a human being. And then they're eviscerated and broken, disassembled for sale. Gassing is what it implies. Their carbon dioxide is funneled into some kind of container, and then they're gassed to death. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to dairy. That's how I feel. Go ahead, next. So So for me, the best way to talk about the dairy industry is to come up with the two most extreme examples I can in terms of what people think of as dairy production. This is Sadie. Sadie was the best cow on the earth. I love this cow fiercely. She was the very first dairy cow I really was able to connect with and make a bond with, and it took me 2 years to do that, but she was didn't like people that much. She is from a conventional dairy farm, and a lot of people don't realize that what I mean when I say conventional, I mean large. Dairy farms have grown immensely in the past 50, 60, 70 years. And so the dairy farm she came from had about 3,000 to 4,000 dairy cows on the premises who were being milked. When she was about 4 years old, she developed mastitis, which is an udder infection, and she was sent to auction. UC Davis purchased her, and UC Davis did not treat her mastitis. Instead, they used her as a teaching tool. So students were allowed to poke her for venipuncture on her neck, and she was used for rectal exams as well. And after 20 weeks, they were sending her back to auction to be slaughtered. Her purpose was served, she was that teaching tool, and that was it. A vet student intervened, and we ended up taking her in. We didn't know it at the time, but she was actually pregnant when we got her. She went into labor, and she was having a very difficult time giving birth, and we had to call a vet out, and unfortunately her calf died inside of her. And when he was finally pulled out, it was the very first time in her life that she had ever groomed her own calf. She had had probably 3 or 4 calves in her life, and not once had she ever been able to groom them after they were born. And we left her alone for several hours just to be with her calf, and she stayed by his side until we had to take him away. We had to take her back to UC Davis to treat her mastitis. She's a very shy cow, very shy, and they were so impatient with her. And as they were taking her out of the trailer, they rushed her in the chute, and she tripped and she fell, and she broke her hip and her knee joint. She's a 1,500-pound, 7-year-old animal. That is a lot to put an adult cow through. And despite all that, she lived with as much dignity and as much pride for herself as she could through the next 8 years until she had to be euthanized. She could be alive today if someone had just said, hey, let's be a little more patient with this cow and let's give her some time to unload herself. Instead, her life was cut short at the age of 14. And she was a very good cow. Sorry. This is a cow who I wish we could say we had rescued, but we haven't. She is from a small raw milk dairy farm where there's about 300 cows at this facility. Next. So you can hit next again. When these 2 girls were born, Sadie was removed from her mom right after birth. Remember, for a cow to produce milk, she's got to have a baby, and that baby, when they're born, well, they can't be taking the milk away from what's going to be sold to people, so they are taken from their moms right after birth. On small farms, on these really nice, gorgeous farms, this is a really beautiful ranch, they're removed from their mom within 48 hours of birth. So yes, they've nursed for 2 days, but as anybody with a child might think of, 2 days is not a very long time to be with your mom. Under natural conditions, these calves stay with their mothers for 8 to 10 months. Females stay with their moms for life. They're a very strong, female-oriented species. Next.
Excuse me, are they selling the colostrum?
They do sell the colostrum, usually to each other, to other dairy farms. They'll often pool the colostrum together.
They're not selling it for milk?
No, they'll sell it to give to the calves. Yeah. So after she's removed from her mom on both these farms, a lot of people confuse these for veal ranches. These are not veal farms, these are calf ranches. Calf ranches house female calves who will eventually replace their moms. I've been to one in the Central Valley that pools calves from small and large farms around the Northern California area, and they have around 3,000 of these female calves. They're housed in hutches. They're often tethered, or they'll have a little outdoor area, and they'll live there for 3 to 6 months by themselves until they're moved into group housing. Some farms do put them in group housing within a week of birth, but most do not, citing biosecurity health reasons. And then this is the group they'll stay with pretty much for the rest of their commercially productive lives. Next. So Sadie's a Holstein. Holstein are big black and white cows. They make up 95% of all dairy cows. There's about 9 million dairy cows in the United States. The other cow was a little brown Jersey. Jerseys make up about 5% of the dairy cows. They're really small, tiny, adorable creatures, and they are used mainly for buttermilk production. So that's just the difference in their breeds, and it impacts their milk production level. Next. It's hard to see, that's a face of a most beautiful, lovely cow. Her name is Frances, and she lives at Animal Place. She is from a beef operation, so her calves are being raised for slaughter, and she produces 1 to 2 gallons of milk a day when she has a calf. This is a normal amount of milk. This is what a calf drinks in a day, and will continue to try and drink for as long as he possibly can, because calves are greedy. Next. This is Elsa. Elsa was a lovely Jersey cow we rescued a few years ago. She died last year. She was 18 when she passed away. She was a very sweet, sweet animal. She's a Jersey, and they produce about 5 gallons of milk a day because they're a smaller breed. As you can see, though, that is still an enormously large amount of milk production for a cow to go through. Next. And then Sadie, when she was in a commercially viable dairy operation, she produced 8 to 10 gallons of milk a day. I don't know if you've ever seen a cow with a full udder who is a Holstein. They can weigh up to 60 pounds. Those udders are incredibly heavy. It's very uncomfortable walking with those udders. A lot of dairy farmers opine that, well, the cows love going into the milking parlor. And I worked on a dairy farm, and let me tell you, they did love going into the milking parlor because they had 50 pounds of milk inside of them, and it was deeply uncomfortable. And so, yeah, they go in there willingly because it alleviates some of the discomfort associated with producing 8 to 10 gallons of milk a day. The health impacts of this: mastitis, udder infections are extremely common. More than half of all dairy cows will suffer mastitis, primarily Holsteins. It's the #1 breed it impacts. In the case of like beef breeds, you see that 10% of the time. So it's a result of overproduction of milk. Because they're producing so much milk, and this is just my theory, they give birth to really large calves. They're like unusually large for the size of the cow. So they have a lot of problems with reproduction and with giving birth. I think the only thing I can think of is nature is trying to adapt to this extraordinary level of milk production by producing large calves who could in theory drink that much milk. But no calf really wants to drink that much milk in a day. 70% of all dairy cows on both small and large farms have no access to grass or graze. And that is because they're producing a lot of milk, which is a really energy intensive process. So often these cows are given grains. Grains are not natural for ruminants. Ruminants are grass eaters. They eat grass. That is what their body is meant to consume and process. But because they have to maintain this high level of milk production, virtually all dairy farms, small and large, give cows grain. Now, grain doesn't sound bad because everybody, I think, associates that with food you give to animals, but it causes metabolic disorders. Given in too much amount, it causes restriction of blood flow to their limbs, so that's why a lot of these cows are lame. They have a lot of foot and leg problems, so it causes a lot of health problems. Next. The only reason these cows are kept alive is because we're selling milk to human beings. Despite the fact that milk is biologically, naturally engineered to satiate and grow a calf, we still steal it from them and we sell it for human consumption. The second that cow cannot give birth, the second that she develops mastitis, the second that she cannot walk to the milking parlor, she's not an economically viable production unit anymore. And she is sent to auction, and then she is sent to slaughter. There is no happy cow on some happy little farm in California where these girls end up. They're all killed, and they all end up in the same exact place that cows raised for slaughter end up, and that's the slaughterhouse. Next. And what about boys? So half the time, those calves who are born, small and large farms, they're female, and those females are going to replace their mom when she is sent to slaughter. And then half the time, those calves are males. Males don't produce milk. In the case of Jerseys, they're really small, so they don't grow as quickly as your typical beef breeds like Angus and Herefords raised for slaughter. The story's a little different with Holsteins, but I'll get to that. Next. Oh, so cute. This is Linus, this is Nicholas, and this is Summer. They're all alive and well, and if you're ever in Grass Valley, you can come visit them. Linus is from a cruelty case where somebody bought 5 calves at auction for $15 each, and they were not feeding them properly, and they were really malnourished, and so they were confiscated by a local animal control agency. We took in 2, the other 3 went to a different sanctuary. Nicholas, he was bought at auction for $15, and the person who bought him tied him up outside of an apartment complex in Berkeley and left him there with hay. And he was 2 days old. And what does a 2-day-old calf need? He needs milk, not hay. He cannot eat hay. And so he was confiscated by the local animal control agency. He's named Nick because we brought him in on Christmas Day, and he'll turn 6 this year. This is Summer, and Summer came in with another steer cow from auction. I'm not ashamed to admit this, but I bought Summer. Do you want to know how much I bought him for? $5. And Freedom, his brother, I bought for $3. None of the farmers wanted them. This guy, we thought we were going to have to euthanize him. I thought we were just doing him a mercy by buying him and taking him to UC Davis to have him euthanized. He was so malnourished. He was covered in open sores. He had mange. He was just a very sickly calf. Freedom, who you can't really see, but he doesn't have a tail, and he ended up dying this year from cancer, which is common in Jersey breeds. And he was only 4, so it was very sad. And nobody wanted him because he didn't have a tail. That is how little the dairy industry values male calves, especially male Jersey calves. You can literally buy them for $3 because they are like the trash to the dairy industry. They don't make money off of these guys. So that's what happens to Jerseys in general. Next. Oh, look at these 2. This is Theo and this is Murphy. They're Holsteins. Theo saved himself. He was some idiot in Sacramento, bought him from a dairy farm and set him up in, and I'm talking like urban Sacramento, where it's not legal to have farm animals, and set him up in the backyard. And Theo was like, I don't really think so. And he busted into the neighbor's yard, and the neighbor was like, oh my God, there's a calf in my yard, and called animal control, and that's how we ended up with Theo. And Murphy was actually rescued by a horse rescue from auction. And he has his horns that he uses, much to our chagrin. So Holsteins are a little different story. So there's only between about 500 to 700,000 male calves who are raised for what is called veal. Most people do not buy veal. Most people don't like veal. It is the flesh of a 18 to 24-week-old calf, male calf. Sometimes the Jerseys end up as what is called bob veal, and that's the flesh of a calf who's 3 weeks old or younger. So it's often more profitable to just kill them when they're just a week old versus trying to raise them for slaughter weight for veal. But in California and a lot of places, it is actually more profitable to raise these guys for beef. And so the vast majority of male Holsteins who are eventually castrated and steered out is what they call them, end up at feedlots. So when you think of beef, you probably don't think of these black and white cows, but 30% of all beef production actually comes from the dairy industry. So that includes unwanted female cows, that is where they end up in the food chain, and then male Holsteins. In California, we have maybe 2 veal farms, so the vast majority are sent either to Harris Ranch, which I'll show a picture of, or to the Midwest to be raised on feedlots. Next. And these are just some examples of how calves who are being raised for veal, and these are kind of iconic images most people are aware of, but they're small crates where the calf can't even turn around. Sometimes they're chained or tethered so they don't interact with the other calves. This is a farm that does group housing, so they live indoors their whole lives. They have a good size amount of room here, but they're raised till they're about 500 pounds. So as you can imagine, in a couple months, they're going to be huge, and they can't really turn around in that enclosure as well. Most veal is produced in Wisconsin, New York, Pennsylvania. Those are the big veal producing states. Next. This is just an example of a feedlot. This is Harris Ranch. All these black and white bovines you see down here are male Holsteins from dairy farms across the state, small and large, who send them off to be fattened for slaughter. Next. So my key takeaways for why dairy production cannot be humane, compassionate, or just. Calves are always taken from their mothers. This is unavoidable. They have to sell that milk to make a profit, and they have to sell that milk to people. They can't be giving it to the calves and sharing it with who was meant to drink that milk. Male calves are always killed. They don't produce milk. You don't need a lot of them to produce the next generation through breeding. Females suffer the ill effects of overproduction. Bovine growth hormone, which a lot of people talk about, is only given to about 17% of all dairy cows. So the vast majority are not given RBST, or a genetically engineered growth hormone. So that is not the reason that they're producing so much milk. They actually give more hormones to cattle on feedlots who are being raised for slaughter than they do dairy cows. That is just the same thing as with egg production. They take animals who produce a lot of milk and they just keep breeding them and breeding them until they have these lines of high producing animals. At the end of the day, it's not profitable to keep the females alive. Sadie was sent to slaughter when she wasn't killed, but she was sent to auction when she was about 4 or 5 years old. So that's the average age for larger farms and for Holsteins. The other cow is kept on the farm for 8 to 10 years. They are a smaller ranch and they can keep them longer. Jerseys can live 18 to 25 years. So even when they're sent to slaughter at age 10, they have another 8 to 10 years of good living for them to enjoy that they are denied. Next. Questions? While I guzzle some water. Well, it's Theo. That's Douglas. Whenever Douglas does anything bad, I get blamed because I picked Douglas because he chewed on my hair and I thought it was super cute. Now he just mounts everybody and is generally a bad guy. That's Murphy. That's Douglas and Linus. They're best buddies. And then that's Maddie. Maddie is a Holstein we rescued from UC Davis. They use cows for blood donations. And she was kept in a 10 by 10 stall for 8 years, and that was her life. And all she wasn't treated with any amount of respect or compassion. She was just used to draw blood to save the lives of other cows. And one day she said, screw this, and knocked somebody over, and they were gonna send her to slaughter, but we were able to rescue her. She hates people, hates them. Don't blame her. Any questions about dairy?
How are you notified of these animals being sent to slaughter? How do you find out?
It depends on the situation. We usually get called by animal control if they ever rescue farmed animals. The vets who contacted us worked at UC Davis, and the vet student who worked there contacted us. They already knew about us. So kind of word of mouth, our relationships we build with other shelters, yeah.
Is there a USDA definition of humane?
Is there a legal definition?
Yeah, USDA or somebody else.
USDA has one label, USDA organic, and it's pretty meaningless. Like in the egg industry, they say they have to have outdoor access, but none of them do have outdoor access. And organic just means they're fed organic feed, and it has nothing to do with their living conditions. So no, there's no federal legislation that really protects the welfare of farmed animals.
Aside from the 48-hour thing versus 1 day, what is the difference between the dairy farms that call themselves humane versus a conventional dairy farm?
Their herds are a lot smaller. They usually use Jersey breeds, so their milk production is a little more decreased. They send the cows to slaughter when they're a little older. They often have some access to graze, but in terms of what I think is meaningful, like do they get to nurse their babies? Do they live out their lives? Do the babies live out their lives? None of that happens. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
How do they get them to produce so much milk? And the second is to do with there was at the beginning of the dairy part, there was this female cows are separated, almost like solitary confinement for a number of weeks. Why do they do that?
I liken the artificial selection you see in farmed animals to that of dogs. If you look at the variety of dog breeds, like English bulldogs have all those smushed in faces and all those problems, that was because somebody saw a trait they liked and they kept breeding those animals together until that trait became extremely exaggerated. And the same thing has happened in the dairy industry, although with a lot more scientific input, and it's a lot more complex than that. But basically, a cow produced a lot of milk, more than the other cows, and so she was constantly bred and bred and bred, and all of those animals were used for breeding purposes, and it continued on. Like, that's the short answer
So only
to that.
17% are given hormones?
Recombinant bovine somatotropin, yeah.
117% are to give hormones to overproduce.
Yes, it increases their milk production.
So the other 83% are they just naturally overproduce.
Yes,
Okay.
unfortunately, yeah. And your second question was the female calves. They cite health reasons. Orphan calves, they're constantly looking for their mama's teat. They're constantly looking for a milk source, so they suck on everything. It's the cutest thing when you rescue them and they're sucking on your hand and they're sucking on your pant leg, but it is a really sad behavior. And because of that, they're gonna suck on everything, including anything covered in shit or anything covered in any, sick items that might have bacteria on them. So they keep them separated so they don't suck on each other. Yeah.
So, how is your operation? How is your operation financed?
Animal Place is funded by the public, by private donors. We're a nonprofit. So
So you do take donations?
yes. Yes, there's my plug. We take donations. I'm running a little low on time, so I'm going to go to the next segment. And again, I'm sorry, although you've been waiting to ask a question
I was
for.
going to ask you, does Animal Place get funding from HSUS or any
No. No, just from people like you guys. Yeah. We have a 600-acre sanctuary in Grass Valley in the Sierra foothills, and then a facility in Vacaville. So the reason, even though the topic, my title is called The Myth of Humane Meat, I'm talking about that last for a couple reasons. One, all animals in the dairy industry and egg industry end up in the same places as animals raised for slaughter. So I didn't want that to be my primary focus. I really wanted to talk about the egg and dairy industry. So the way I'm going to just talk about animal slaughter and raising animals for their meat production is really just through some of the stories of the animals at Animal Place and why their stories are not so different than the stories of animals who are on industrial farms. Next. Oh, Ruby. Ruby is the sassiest pig we have, and she's only about this tall, so she packs all of her personality into a tiny little form. Ruby is from really is a gorgeous pig farm in the Bay Area, and these pigs are quote unquote heritage breeds, so they're bred to grow a little slower. They're a lot smaller. She's never going to be bigger than 400 pounds versus 8 to 1,000 pounds with some of these other breeds. And they got big floppy ears, they're super adorable, and they're open to the public for tours. And this woman was on one of the tours at this particular farm, and in the farmer's hands, and I really cannot make this stuff up, she had Ruby in her arms. And so the visitor asked her, oh, what's the story with this little piglet in your arms? And the farmer was pretty brutally honest about what the situation was with Ruby. Ruby was a runt. She was not going to grow fast. She was sickly. It was not profitable to nurse her back to health to then slaughter her when she was only 8 months old. And so they were going to, as the farmer put it, euthanize Ruby. And the woman asked, well, what does that mean? How do you euthanize them? And she said, we do it the same way that all pig farms do it. And as they grab them by the back of their legs and they slam them into the concrete until their brains are bashed in. And that is how they kill runt or sickly piglets. It is an AVMA approved method of disposing of unwanted piglets, and it is what virtually all pig farms do to sickly piglets. And that was going to be her fate. And because she wasn't going to be profitable, and because I think maybe on some level the farmer recognized how awful that was, although she didn't recognize how awful it was to kill her 8 months later, when the woman asked if she could take Ruby, the farmer gave her up. This woman spent 2 months nursing her back to health. She was the most well-trained piglet we have ever rescued. She knew how to sit. She walked on a harness. That lasted about 5 minutes at our place because we don't reinforce any of those kind of behaviors. And now she is the worst behaved pig we have. But we still love her. She's super cute.
She has the mind of her own.
She does, yes. And we respect that. Next. This is Hazel Basil. Hazel is from a small pig farm in Northern California. She was sourced from a auction, and at auction they sell a variety of animals. So she was bought by this farm in and I think you can see it, but you can see her ears look a little strange. They're scalloped looking, and this is a really common practice on pig farms to identify which herd and litter they come from. They take scissors and they cut out holes into their ears without pain relief. She's also been tail docked, so her tail has been snipped off without any pain relief. If she had been a boy, she would have been castrated without pain relief. And castration is done on all farms raising animals for slaughter, and it's done without any pain relief, and it's incredibly painful. I studied animal science at UC Davis, and I've seen firsthand what piglet castration looks like, and it's not pleasant. And again, she would have been slaughtered when she was about 6 months old. A neighbor actually called animal control, and they came out, and she was really sickly. She had a really bad inner ear infection and mange, and so she was confiscated, and we took her in. Next, Frances. It's the only time I can touch her nose because she won't let me near her. Frances is an adorable cow. She is from a very small farm raising cattle for slaughter. All of her babies were taken from her when they were about 8 to 10 months old, and then fattened in a separate pasture and then sent to slaughter when they were only about 2 years old. In cow years, that's like slaughtering like a 10-year-old kid. They're still really young, figuring out their life and their place in the world. Frances developed what the farm thought was an eye infection, and lucky for her, they tried to treat it. They used a drug that you can't use in food-producing animals, and so and at the time they thought she was pregnant. She was not pregnant, unfortunately, because that would have been really cute. They couldn't sell her or her calves for slaughter, and so they were going to send her off to be killed, and the vet who was working with them said, well, what if we find a place where she can live out her life? And they contacted us, and we took her in. Her best friend is Tommy, that big butt back there. Next. Ooh, this is Tommy, and this is Stanley. Stanley is super cute. He's a year old, and you can see he's still a baby. You know, in another year, that's the age he would be slaughtered at. And he wouldn't really be much bigger, and he wouldn't be any less cute. Tommy is from a beef ranch that raises cattle for slaughter. They have access to grass. They're all castrated when they're about 4 months old. They use rubber bands around their testicles until the testicles fall off. Angus don't have horns, so at the very least they were not dehorned without any pain relief, which is common on most dairy farms and beef operations. And he was rescued by a horse rescue who took him in because the beef rancher said he was too small to be slaughtered. Little Stanlet here saved himself. He was born on a little cow-calf operation, which is where mama cows are bred to produce calves who then go off to be slaughtered. And he busted out of this farm and ended up in the middle of the road on a really stormy night, really busy road, and a highway patrolman actually rescued him and brought him to the shelter, and that's how we saved his life. He loves people. Next. Okay, so you can click next again. I really love this quote. So Diestel Turkey Ranch is a pasture-based, free-range turkey farm, certified humane. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Global Animal Partnership, but they are the kind of the labeling rules for all animal products that can be sold to Whole Foods market, and they claim to have, you know, the best welfare standards there is. And he is a step 5, the highest level of certification you can get from Global Animal Partnership, and he is also a certified humane farm. And he says that beak trimming or debeaking, that the beaks grow back and that it doesn't hurt them. There is a stack of scientific journals bigger than this that say otherwise. Every single scientific study, which involves mutilating these animals, shows that beaks are richly innervated. They have nerves that run to the tip of those beaks, and they have blood vessels in those beaks. And when you cut them off, it hurts, and it leaves them physically mutilated for the rest of their lives. This is Dakota, and this is him at 2 years of age, and his beak still has not grown back, despite what Tim says. And you can't really see it, but the first digits of his toes have been cut off as well. And he is from a pasture-based free-range turkey farm. He was liberated by a sneaky activist and left on our doorstep a couple weeks before Thanksgiving a couple of years ago. And there were 4 little turkey babies with a little note that said, "Happy Thanksgiving." And it was a happy Thanksgiving. And they are still alive with the exception of one. Next. And then this is Jude. If you go to our YouTube channel, you can watch a video about Jude. Jude has an incredible story. He is from a Bay Area turkey farm that raises turkeys for Thanksgiving slaughter. They raise about 40,000 turkeys each year. They have access to pasture and graze, supposedly this great life. Jude, if you ever met Jude, and I said maybe someday you can, he's really friendly and sweet, you can see why this story is plausible. He is very shy. The other turkeys kind of pick on him a little bit. And so he used to jump into the neighbor's yard and he would find food there and he would stay away from all the other turkeys. And so on the day, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving last year, when catchers came and they went into his shed where all the birds had been locked up, all 40,000 of them, grabbing them by the legs, shoving them into cages, and transporting them for Thanksgiving slaughter, Jude was hiding in a neighbor's yard. And when he flew back, he was the only bird left. And so we went out there and we brought Jude home. He's been severely debeaked. We thought he was a girl because it's hard to see, but he looks very feminine because his snood, which is that fleshy bit that comes off their face, which is used for communication between male turkeys, as well as thermoregulation, had been cut off without pain relief using scissors. His beak has been cut off. They do detoe so fast that often they'll miss some toes, lucky for Jude, but some of his toes have been cut off as well. These guys are slaughtered when they're only 6 months old. On Diesel Ranch, they slaughter when they're about 8 months old. Next. And then I think this is just, I don't know, kind of iconic and a good place to kind of end. This is White Oak Pastures, Will Harris. He's a Step 5 Plus rancher for the Global Animal Partnership, labeling whatever. And this is what he says. If you raise an animal and you can't turn it into meat, then it's just going to become an old and infirmed animal. And God forbid that happen, because none of us have old dogs or cats we keep around. And who would be benefiting from that? These animals are killed right in the prime of their life. They don't volunteer to make that sacrifice, obviously, but what's so wrong about that? They never suffer a day, except maybe that day. They express instinctive behavior all day long, every day. My food animals have a better life than most people's pets. I mean, it's such a huge disconnect. This is one of the chickens from his farm, and these are, if you ever meet peepers, we call them peepers. They're broiler chickens raised for their flesh. They are the nicest, most friendly, inquisitive, just most personable birds you will ever meet. It just boggles my mind how incredibly inquisitive and kind they are. They have attitudes too, but she's a perfectly lovely chicken, and she's 8 weeks old, and this is where she ends up. You know, her throat slit. And it's like, I don't know how you reconcile that, really. Next. So the key takeaways, these animals, like the turkeys, who came from what are arguably really nice, certified humane, Step 5 level, whatever, farms, they're still debeaked, their toes are still cut off, they're still dehorned, they're still castrated without pain relief. All that unnatural growth, like those big white-breasted turkeys, even though they come from nice farms, they still suffer the ill effects of overproduction. And at the end of the day, they're all slaughtered. We take away their lives when we absolutely do not have to, and I think that is the worst thing that we inflict upon these animals aside from the breeding practices we engage in. They want to live. That's all they want to do, and that is the one thing we can give them by simply not eating their flesh, not eating their eggs, not drinking their milk or wearing their furs or skins, because just like us, they want to survive. And I feel it's the most compassionate and just thing to do that for them. The end. Do I have any time, or what time is it?
It's just a little before 3:15.
Oh, okay, then no. But I will go outside if anybody has any questions. I just don't want to take up any time of the presentation. And we have a table inside the auditorium in between speakers if you want to stop by.